Yeah, thanks everyone for being here, and we're going to do something a little bit different than I usually do on my philosophical topics. We're going to start with just people reacting to the films, and I want to hear what people feel about it because I think these films will get a reaction from a lot of people, either one way or the other, and I'm just curious what people think. There's no, I'm not necessarily promoting one correct answer to this, so it's really, uh, yeah. I mean, I think there's really three possible perspectives you could take. You could sympathize with those who think that depopulation is a serious problem, like the Stephen Shaw and other demographers, for example, as well as some characters like Elon Musk, for example. Or you can go the direction of the antinatalist, who feel that this is not a bad thing. It's good that human beings are slowly disappearing. Or you can take a middle ground, such as the article that I put up there by Jason Anthony, who seems to think that we don't, he calls himself an anti-pro-natalist, meaning, which isn't the same thing as being an anti-natalist. He just thinks that uh, it's not a bad thing that there are fewer and fewer people in the world, but he's not saying, taking the antinatalist line, that it would be a good thing if we all disappeared, if we all became extinct. He's suggesting something like a semi-utopian back to nature time when we get comfortable with a smaller, more modest population on the planet that's in tune with nature and basically go back in time to a century or 2 centuries ago, but a more enlightened understanding, not necessarily go back in time, but with a more understanding of what's a better understanding of our position in the natural world. It's a kind of a quasi-utopian view, and I think it's a sensible one, but I suspect it's a little bit unrealistic. But you guys might be thinking differently. Anyway, and then depending on what people say, I may bring up some more strictly speaking philosophical arguments on both sides here toward the end. But for now, I want to start out by just opening up people to give me your reactions if you have a strong reaction to this, to one side or the other of these documentaries. Um, to just start out I want to make sure that that happens first, and then maybe we'll talk about the more philosophical side. So, does anybody want to have an immediate reaction to one side or the other, or either one of these two documentaries? Just raise your hand or speak up. Either way. Um, anybody out there who wants to start?
I,
Um,
the first one I watched, I
yeah.
don't remember what the names of the two movies were, but the one that had all the the guy had a very curious voice. If I try to remember, and then
Birthgap.
I watched it again. You posted it 2 years ago. I was looking forward to this resuming,
Yeah.
uh,
The
and so
birth
I
gap.
jumped.
The birth gap.
Yeah,
Doc.
yeah. The
Okay.
birth gap, yeah,
Okay.
and and I remember I was at the time I was waiting for it to come up, and that's 2 years now. So I watched that, and it was a convincing case that depopulation is happening across so many countries, just about every one, and no one had a one reason for the whole thing. But I kept thinking, like, and they skipped over the thing. It's like, well, isn't this what we wanted? We were saying that there's going to be too many people, and now there's less people, and now we're complaining, and all the reasons the, came down to taxes, or more broadly, slightly more broadly, the welfare of individual nations,
Hmm.
and perhaps the political stability, but only in view of the rather recent invention of social welfare, at least in that form. Uh, I was less alarmed by it than I was 2 years ago. Like, well, yeah, we're getting what we asked for. So it could be bad for nationalism, but that could be a good thing. Um, Remind me what the second one was because that one was new.
The second one was it's called let's see, what was it? Or something about we shouldn't be born or something. It's what
Yeah, okay, yeah.
yeah, so
That
it's
that
an
was
antenatal is interview with various antenatalists out there. Yeah.
yeah, and I like that as a documentary, especially because it gave you the personal side of how people were looking at this. It did seem that most of the people who had that view that the director found anyway were going. And I think, and you're right. You put it as a um, they had particular reasons of their own. There were specific reasons to their situation, which that could be shared by other people. So I mean that's why there's more than just a couple people. But it was kind of they all seemed a little bit off in that way because they're basically that one bad thing happened to them. And now they're saying this is everybody should not have kids. Um, uh,
Well, there is a philosophical argument behind it that goes back to, of course, well, it goes back to ancient history, but in recent times, it is sparked by, of course, David Benatar's book back in the about 15
mm,
years ago, entitled "Better to Never to Have Been." It actually stirred up a whole controversy within philosophy and ethics, and has spread way beyond just academia to these groups. And supposedly, the number of antinatalists out there is growing. Uh, to remind people what antinatalism is, at least the kind that is of concern here, it's the view that it is morally incumbent on us to stop reproducing. It's not that they believe that they are against children or against life. They're against pain and suffering, uh, re, the best way to prevent pain and suffering is not to be here to experience it. And of course, there are standard responses to that. That the usual one is that, well, if you don't come into the world, then you also miss out on all the opposite, the joy and happiness that you don't ever get a chance to have. But one of the Benatarian argument is that that doesn't make up for it. For one thing, you're taking a chance when you bring somebody into the world that you're hoping that things will go well for them, but you're guaranteeing something that you cannot guarantee their well-being, but you can guarantee one thing, that they will die, and they will have to get old and die, and that is a guarantee for everybody who's born. And that's something that you can it's kind of a difficult question because you can imagine someone who isn't born yet born being asked, do you want to be born or not? Except that doesn't really make sense because you're not there to be asked. But if you somehow knew in advance what life would entail and were asked whether you wanted it or not, it's not clear that the answer would be yes. I mean, I for one, I mean, it's a conceptually troublesome question, but I don't miss not having been here during World War II or the Jurassic period when the dinosaurs were exterminated or any point in the past. If uh, I Now for all of us who are already here, that's a different story. We have uh, we're in the game. For us, the best we can do is try to get through life with the least amount of pain and suffering. That's for us. But for someone who didn't have to be exposed to it at all, it's not a clear cut answer that they would have preferred to be born than not to be born. Anyway, uh, there's some. Does anybody else want to react?
Well, I think we all, well, whether we like it or not, we're here. And there needs to be a balance between the amount of people and the amount of food that we produce.
Yeah.
And then I think that's the main thing. We need to have a balance between what we do and what the food we produce.
hmm So you're arguing, Darlene, for some kind of optimal population that is sustainable over time, that we're not overpopulating and we're not depopulating or something like that. Is that
Right. We
okay?
need to have enough food for well, we need to be able to raise enough food for the people that we have.
Okay. And I assume not just well, according to demographers, we're actually way past that. But way back in the 1970s, there was a real that documentary starts out with a famous uh, character of that time. I forget his name. Who wrote a book called The Population Bomb. And there's a quote from President Nixon at the time, who were predicting by the year 2000 we would be in horrible straits. There would be wars of starvation, where countries not having enough food would be attacking other countries, just fighting over scraps of food because there wouldn't be enough food. Well, that was the year 2000, and we're still having wars 25 years later after that 2000, but they're not about food. It's the wars we're having now are clearly about things beyond mere subsistence. In fact, it's rare in history when you have to go back to much earlier times when it was scarcity of actual uh, food that was causing wars. Um, because of technology, agricultural technology, we actually have enough food to feed everybody in the world, and 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 some. There are problems, though. There is starvation in the world, but it's not because there isn't food. It's because of how the food is distributed and all kinds of political people wanting to have power over others that's causing the famine that still exists in the world. It's not about absence of resources. It's about how we choose to distribute those resources. Anyway, but I understand you. I think one of your points, I think someone who comes close to saying what you're saying, Darlene, is that article by Jason Anthony. He suggests something like in between these extremes. He suggests, and I recommend it to anyone who thinks that what we ought to do is somebody has their mic on and there's a background. Uh,
It's Darlene.
Darlene, could you turn off uh, your yeah? All right, yeah. Yeah, Jason Anthony suggested we should try to strive for a sustainable population that is what that sustainable population is. He doesn't quite say, but he thinks that there ought to be a way in which we could say, look, enough is enough. We don't need infinitely more people. He doesn't agree with people like Elon Musk, who says we need to colonize Mars and expand to conquer the universe to have more and more people in the universe. There's a reason, an economic, political reason for that. It has to do with capitalism. The biggest threat to capitalism is a shrinking market, consumer market. It won't be socialism or communism that defeats capitalism. It'll be just not enough customers. And if you can see that there's an end to that your customer base is going to be shrinking in the future, that's bad news if you're a, a capitalist or someone like Elon Musk who needs more customers, more Teslas sold, and so on. But um, Anthony suggests that we need to go back back in time, but not quite literally back in time, back to a time when we could live in greater harmony with the resources on this planet versus trying to this urgency to go conquer other planets, to become more modest in what we ask of the world and live within our means and live on less in order less demands on the environment. And that means fewer people, but not no people. So he's not an antinatalist. He just thinks there's something in between that we could strive for. Anyway, but are there other reactions to the films? Just go ahead and speak up or raise your hand if you want.
You've got two hands
Oh,
already.
I'm sorry. I didn't see him. Anne and then Barbara. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the documentaries referenced, um, modern concerns, but in a certain sense, we've had populations come and go before. So the idea that all people will vanish just because, uh, this decline, doesn't make sense to me. And I expect that as the suggester, a new equilibrium will emerge, but it'll be forced upon us by circumstance. And I suggest that, where resources will dictate by available energy what will be possible, and our society will adjust based on available energy resources. Part of capitalism's expanse is cheap available energy allows capitalism to expand. A shortage of energy, I think, curtails capitalism along with our other ambitions.
Okay. So you think that uh, circumstances will kind of force an equilibrium? I mean, how is that supposed to happen? Because in the documentary, um, uh, the it what is it going to be for? You said forced on us by, say, government or people just
No,
naturally?
circumstance.
What like?
Circumstance.
Could you be more specific? What circumstance?
Well, in the sense if if you run short on food, you run short on energy, your regions of places that you can populate are shrinking. You will have smaller islands
Hmm.
of groups of people.
But in the documentary, it wasn't shortage of food or energy that was causing the depopulation.
No, but I think in a sense that the documentary is very much concerned with the preserving the status quo as exactly it is. Yes, the status quo is exactly it is will not survive this process. But I think their definition of workable society is too narrow.
Okay, and what would you could you explain your idea of it? What kind of society do you envision? What is it?
Um, we've had the such societies before.
Yeah, like
And
us.
in a sense, it will be some kind of amalgam of things that we can do now, mixed with ways we have adapted in the past, to produce some kind of hybrid, but will be different than what we enjoy right now. I mean, right now, we could find ourselves in an authoritarian state, which we hadn't considered before as being a probability. You could also find yourself in something akin to a medieval monarchy or a religious theocracy that creates a very stratified but stable society. I mean, it turns out theocracies can endure, in a sense. The Catholic Church enjoyed a good 1,000 year run as being hegemonic throughout Europe. So I mean, there's lots of different amalgams. The authors of the documentary are correct to point out that the thing that we have enjoyed, this modern interconnected, energy-rich society based on continued population expansion and continued consumption will, I mean, in a certain sense, just to touch base, I mean, just to go back to the sense when Rome collapsed, everybody didn't just disappear. They assimilated into smaller groups. When the Mayans collapsed, they didn't necessarily all die. They also reduced into smaller communities. There were places where people did in fact die out, but that's not necessarily the only option.
Hmm. Well, the reason one of the points the Shaw documentary makes is that uh, we've never been in history in this place before. There has never been a time when, uh, I mean, there have been times that anthropologists will tell you there have been times when there were bottlenecks and when the diseases or ice ages or whatever caused humanity almost to become extinct, but there were always external events. This not as a result of seemingly a human will choices that people are making to have fewer children, and not be it just because they're starving to death, but because they've set other priorities. They want to in, they the refrain that kept on coming up in the documentary is that people said, "Yeah, I want to have children, but not now." And there's certain biological constraints that are making that it's like a mass
Sure,
self-deception about what is possible. Can you put it off forever? Apparently not. And the whole world seems to be, and it seems to be a product of progress, of economic success, because it's the countries that are leading the depopulation are Western, relatively wealthy countries. It's happening in what people used to call undeveloped countries as well, but at a way behind. But they're moving in that direction as well. And it seems to be a social, mass psychological uh, feeling that having children is just not the number one priority anymore. For I can remember my our great grandparents. For most of human history, people had babies first, and then they worried about how they're going to take care of them later. apparently that's no longer the case. It's we got to prepare for having children. We have high standards of what a parenthood, a proper parent should be, and all these social psychological constraints are putting pressure on people to place other things as being more immediately important than actually having babies, and certain biological facts are conspiring with that to make it not happen. At least that's the thesis of the documentary.
Yeah,
Um,
which I think is just not
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 not true.
not broad enough in its understanding. It's narrowly focusing because at a certain point you can say, oh, you have the gerontocracy, but in a sense that he points to the pill, but I would also say life expectancy as well.
Hmm.
And
Right.
the idea is that what you have is basically people responding to an overabundance of people living too long. What's the answer to that? You'll find, the answer will probably show up in a falling life expectancy, which is already beginning here.
All right. I'll say some more later, but I want to let Barbara speak. Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, well, this isn't, it seems to me that all an argument for restricting, uh, population because of suffering. It seems like even when you want to defer having children, you want to defer not to decrease your own suffering or to increase their well-being or your well-being or something. So there's always this idea that suffering is the thing that needs to be minimized. And now that we rely on technology, we think we can do that in an unlimited way, which I won't comment on. But the only my comment is that I've been going to a lot of art museums lately, and in every big art museum, there's a lot of medieval art, and some of the images are extremely bloody, depressing, gory, and they all emphasize suffering. Obviously, the crucifixion is the biggest. And so I was looking at this one huge. It was actually a relief of Christ on the cross, big, like taller than a person, and or just as tall. And I'm thinking to myself, what did people think? What did they see when they saw that? And it hit me that actually suffering would have been something that would have been considered not now. Don't get me wrong. I don't believe. I'm not religious, and I don't think we should go back to the Middle Ages. But the idea that suffering is formative, let me put it that way, and that if you deprive people of the opportunity to suffer, now how you define that, I think depends, right? But if you deprive people of the opportunity to, let's say, have enough wiggle room to have both good and bad in their lives, which take it that way, you deprive them of the opportunity to form their characters, period. I'm not saying good, I'm not saying bad, but that's just what struck me when I saw that crucifixion scene. And so I just thought I'd share it.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Barbara. So you're suggesting that suffering or pain and suffering avoidance is not necessarily a good thing, or but not you're not saying that it is a good thing, but it's not necessarily the overriding value that we should be trying to promote or
Yeah,
something.
I would put it in moderate terms. I wouldn't say, yay for suffering, but yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, actually, I sort of agree with that a little bit. In fact, that's going to come up in the Gilgamesh topic because that is all about suffering and how suffering literally civilizes people, puts them in their place, in a place where they need to be to become actually human. Because, uh, yeah, well, that's another topic, but I don't want to get into that right now. But it is related to that, which maybe we'll come back to when we get to that topic. Well, go ahead, Wayne. Go.
Yes, thank you for two interesting documentaries to look at. I'm afraid I only found out about it recently, so I only saw part of each. Um, on the depopulation one, the birth gap, I found it interesting simply because the last time I looked at the issue and such was back in the 90s, and we were pretty much concluding whereas the Europeans are definitely having a below average below replacement fertility. The U.S. was seemingly kind of staying around it roughly. And when I found out about it a few years ago, I went, oh, what happened? And it looked like it was the Great Recession that started pushing our fertility rate below replacement. So I was intrigued with the phenomenon. I can understand some of the arguments for the problems, but at least the first 15 minutes of the documentary, I found it a little bit too one-sided. And it was wanted, maybe he corrects it later on, but I found it a little bit unbalanced to the point where I went, okay, let's stop right now and let's look at Wikipedia and some of the counter arguments. One of which was, well, yeah, we may have less workers per retiree, but if the productivity of the workers increases, it kind of nets out. So I'm not really sure of where I would ultimately stand on it. I think I mentioned that I grew up in the 60s. So the population bomb was just really in our mind. So the idea we might have a problem with underpopulation is kind of new to me. So I'm a little bit biased, but right now I want to see a little bit more about it before I come out either way on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Wayne. Uh, yeah, I did some research besides watching the documentary. Uh, the factual question about whether depopulation is really happening is, I think, at this point beyond question. Most demographers agree. There's another. You can find interviews by Paul Morland, who's a British demographer who's written books about this for a long time actually, and he's um, yeah, he says it's happening and it's happening everywhere. It's obviously happening faster in more developed countries for all kinds of reasons, predictable reasons. But unless you believe that we should actually keep poor countries poor on purpose, so they will supply cheap labor to keep the richer countries rich, and unless you're going to take that view, it's bound to affect the whole world, assuming the world uh, exists for that long. But to the extent that humanity, all nations are developing and becoming more prosperous, even the poorest, compared to what they were, say, half a century or a century ago. To the extent it's progress, human, economic, and political progress is happening, it's leading toward fewer and fewer children being born everywhere, wherever that happens. There's a clear connection between education and prosperity and having fewer children. Uh, but so the fact of it, I don't think is disputed. It's a bit like climate change. In the early days of climate change, there were deniers, and many of those deniers were correct to be critical of it, as any kind of scientific proposal. So whenever some scientist warns you about this disaster is coming, you should be critical. However, uh, the responsibility of an intelligent person is to investigate, to look at what the other scientists are saying, to look at the facts as far as you can get into them, and to listen to other views. And eventually, there develops a growing consensus that something is true. For example, climate change. Well, depopulation is probably not quite yet to the point of being as firmly backed up by science, although it's getting very close, as climate change. But the factual question, for my money, is correct. It's happening, and it's happening worldwide. Um, the question is it a good thing or a bad thing? And that's where people, I think, are divided. I can understand certain political views that look at it as a worry about, say, conservatives, people like Elon Musk and other billionaires who became billionaires because they could sell a lot of stuff to a lot of people, and when your customer base is disappearing, that's bad news. I can see the remote reason for wanting to promote the idea of depopulation, as Elon Musk does in that documentary and others as well. I think he has, what, 14 children. He's trying to single-handedly fix the problem. But that it's happening. Let's assume that, and there's
No, if I can interrupt, I'm not denying that it's happening. I'm just not altogether sure of the implications of it economically.
All
but
right.
the effect of it seems to be the case, with a few
Yeah.
exceptions. Like I believe sub-Saharan Africa is still growing, with
Yeah.
Nigeria projected to have over 400 million people,
Yeah.
and sometimes in the future. But China is going down. India, the last I saw it, it was still growing, not as rapidly as at one time, but it
Right.
was still.
Yeah.
That's why it was now overtaking China. And that's what I'm not denying that. I just not altogether sure of economic implications.
Yeah.
Because to be like Jeff, uh, I don't see anything bad about our shrinking the population. If we only had half the population now, we would not have global warming.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the population we had when we were kids would not have generated global warming.
Yeah.
But the trajectory for it, I'm not altogether sure if we're in the best one or not. That's where I'm agnostic on.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption, but I wasn't denying the fact.
Okay. No, thanks. Thanks. I actually I didn't think that you were denying it. What I was getting at is that if it if if the trend continues, and the demographers seem to say that it is going to continue, there's no obvious reason, short of some pretty draconian or pretty drastic measures that, say, governments would take, or nightmare scenarios like, say, the science fiction scenario of what Margaret Atwood's novel The Handmaid's Tale, where governments basically factory farm or draft women to produce babies because they need more citizens. Because some countries like South Korea, for example, or Japan, are really in serious conditions. I mean, if trends continue, and what could possibly alter those trends? And that's the disturbing part. What could stop these trends, reverse them, or even just slow them down? That's the disturbing part. What, short of government coming down hard on people and if they don't reproduce, or alternatively start encouraging old people to shuffle off their mortal coil before it's their time. In other words, because there's too many of them. People my age, and actually those old people my age approximately, we're not going to be affected by the worst of this. This is going to be happening about the worst of this if trends continue 20, 30, 40 years down the line. But young people today, when they get to be my age or our age, um, they're going to start to see the crunch come down, where some governments are actually encouraging or trying to encourage a voluntary euthanasia, where old people say, look, you're not productive anymore, you're costing us a lot of money, and maybe out of a sense of public responsibility, maybe you should gently go away. I mean, there's people talking about this now. It's no government who's suggesting it yet, but if things get worse, this is what might be down the pike for many people. It's hard. The case of South Korea and Japan are some of the worst cases in the world. South Korea is, I think, the absolute. I don't know what's going to happen to South Korea. There comes a point in which you can't stop it, short of well, Elon Musk says somewhat. I mean, responded to this. People say, "Well, what about immigration? If people are not reproducing, just invite more people from somewhere else to come fill those jobs and support those old people." But as he says at one point, and I'm no fan of Elon Musk, by the way, but he did make a point when he said, "From where? As long as sub-Saharan Africa and certain parts of the world are still reproducing, there will be a place for those people to come from. But the long-term prospects are that those countries too, unless you want to somehow force those countries to stay in terrible, where people want to leave those countries, keep them poor, keep them undeveloped, so they will supply cheap labor for the rest of us. Unless that's your plan, there's going to be an issue where there won't be any place for people to immigrate from. So it's going to affect everybody. Anyway, uh, Sumesh and then Wendell. Go ahead, Sumesh.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, these were two very interesting documentaries, and I, uh, I agree with what I think Anne was saying earlier um, about how, you know, some new equilibrium is obviously going to form here, or something's happening. And I found it interesting, I guess, in the Birthgap documentary, the pattern that emerged was that there was some sort of economic shock like in the 70s, the oil crisis particularly hit Japan and Italy, among some other countries, very hard. And so that generation had less children, and then that became the norm. And then subsequent generations just followed that norm. It was no longer like, oh, everyone had to have a kid in those countries. And you know, they said in the U.S. there was a clear drop after the 2008 financial crisis, and you know, if you look at the U.S., I guess you know, we in the U.S. there was the Great Depression, and then births, you know, sort of skyrocketed after World War II. There was like the baby boomers, um, and it's interesting. You know, what Jeff was saying earlier about how in that anti-natalist documentary there was a lot of the people that were interviewed um, seem to have some commonalities in terms of like some of their life experiences, and you know, I think there is, I think their moral argument for why we shouldn't have children coincides with the reason a lot of the people in the Birthgap documentary were giving, as you were saying, Victor, with the reasoning for not having children is they're not ready. They want to make sure they can provide for their children, that they're stable themselves. So, you know, I think a lot of the people in the anti-natalist documentary that were interviewed, they had childhood experiences. They had parents who were maybe not ready to be parents, maybe not adequately prepared for that responsibility, and that affected how they were raised. So I think there is something to be said for not making that mistake again. And you know, if people have children, there should be more education about how, you know, how childhood development works and how early experiences affect their later happiness and prosperity. There's you know, scientific evidence that shows how your childhood experiences has a tremendous impact on how you succeed later in life, your happiness, your mental health issues, and you know, incidents of various you know, various things, you know, various mental health problems and illnesses. And so, you know, I think part of that moral quandary can at least partially be, I mean, still maybe you can say like, okay, this unborn child cannot vouch for whether or not they want to be born, but you can at least kind of address part of it by improving their childhood. And so I think like if something changes that makes it more possible to make that an easier transition to parenthood, and I think that's something Wayne brought up. I think he said he read it on Wikipedia. One of the arguments is if productivity goes up per worker, even if as we have an aging population, um, that can account for some deficits in productivity. But if productivity goes up in, you know, like, so for example, like Japan, they knew about this population crisis at least since maybe the 90s. And I know, for example, like the company Honda Motor Corporation, they have been trying to build a robot called the Asimo robot since the 80s. They've been working on this thing. And part of, I mean, one of the main things they said it was for was to take care of elderly people. They want to have a robot that could go into nursing homes, take care of elderly people. That robot never had that capability. After, you know, nearly 40 years of development, that the Asimo Honda robot can barely even walk. But in the last 2 years, there are now dozens of startup companies that have humanoid robots that can walk, they can dance, they can do karate. I wonder what's going to happen when those things reach the capability where they could potentially take human jobs. It's already happening. Some estimates say the robots that are currently being tested, they can do jobs, you know, like warehouse jobs, factory jobs for $1 an hour. So, you know, the economics of that are interesting, but it's also going to change employment. So it's going to be interesting. A new, like Ann said, a new equilibrium, because there's going to be robots that can maybe take care of children. You know, there's maybe, you know, like we don't, maybe we can afford to have that, or maybe there's going to be such a loss of employment that unless there's some sort of like universal basic income or something, it's just going to be chaos. So who knows what's going to happen.
Okay, thank you, Sumesh. You make some good points. You seem to suggest that technology and productivity, increased productivity, will relieve some of the pressures that I think the documentary, Shaw's documentary, makes about how we're going to take care of old people, and perhaps relieve some of the pressures that young people who are not having children because they're afraid they won't have the time or the what it takes to invest in those children, but technology and robots might help, um, and that this will change things in the future. Uh, all that sounds very nice, but it's science fictiony. But I'm not sure that, for one thing, um, there's a downside to increased productivity. Um, that to the extent, I mean, a humanistic downside, because, well, let me take myself. When I get too old to be able to take care of myself, would like to extend my life by having a robot take care of me? Frankly, if it gets to that point, I'd rather just end it sooner. I'm not interested in being taken care of by a robot. I'm not sure that a child would be. Robots might be aids. This way that plumping down a child in front of a television may be a substitute for a babysitter. But I don't know. I don't have as much faith that technology is going to help with these matters at either end, at either taking care of old people or young people. But anyway, that's just my opinion. I want to let Wendell, then Jeff. Go ahead, Wendell.
Hello, wonderful humans. Thank you for having me. I have two favors to ask. Um, to remember that I am not your enemy and I am just a human being bumbling around on this planet. And the second is to, if you should feel uncomfortable with some questions I may introduce that I ask, don't uh, take it as an attack personally. Okay, thank you. Now, like I said, I'm bumbling around on this planet, and I've asked some questions like, who owned the first anything? Because I've been unemployed for like a little over a year, and I've got to make this money. I've got to generate capital in order to be alive on the planet. Okay, which other living creature is conditioned to believe you have to have this credit score, otherwise you're unworthy? Is that something natural? Is it just conditioning? Because somewhere along the way, somebody took the first whatever it is and said, I own it. For example, a cow. Cows were on the planet, so were people. But somebody took a cow and said, hey, I will milk this cow and I will trade this milk for some oranges. Orange trees were on the planet. Who owned the first orange seed to say, I will plant this orange seed and get me some oranges so I could trade for this milk? Couple of questions. Who says we need a government, we need a leader, or an economy? Trees, plants, they are growing without any of these economies that have to heat up, stagflate, inflate, whatever flate economies do. Humans are the only ones, in my humble opinion, conditioned to be good economic slaves. Are we bad people? No,
Uh,
because I find that yes,
Wendell, could you make this relate to the depopulation or
okay,
question here?
right, the population thing. When I view these videos, not only these, two and three and four, I notice it's people who still haven't. Um, is it the eugenicists who still haven't grasped the DNA science that we are all one race, the human race? I mean, these are probably people who, socialism is a scary word to them. Communism, those are just buzzwords. Who says we've got to buy and sell? Who says, like we are running out of food? Who says that the human race is dying out? Or is it just the eugenicists the colonizer conditioning thing that we are white people and black people, and the Western world is the most advanced, and they brought everything on this planet to life, the civilization, which is all a bunch of crap. And I wish more people would do their own research and check into what the science says as opposed to what the feeling, the social construct that started way back when, that says we are different races, that
Okay,
says
okay,
different all.
Wendell, do you think depopulation is a good thing or a bad thing? If I could ask
No,
you,
no. The depopulation is that thing from the eugenics point of view again.
but you think it's a good thing yourself?
It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's what nature, our current economic slavery system, is outside of nature. Birds, they don't have to worry that, hey, man, we don't have enough worms, so I can't start a family. They just do it because that's what nature is saying: procreate.
Okay,
Human beings, with all of our false concepts, are compounding the problem. Like I said, nobody is a bad human being because they are going off of what they call incorrect, unscientific, not information. It's just that we've been taught we're white, black, green, or blue, and the white population is dwindling, or the Japanese population, or the South Korean. Human beings are of the planet. Stop with the subhuman labels. Stop with this buying and selling of stuff that you don't own. Like in South Africa, they're like, oh, some people came, stole the land. So some people are like, hey, there's inequity. So we are taking it back because your foreparents stole it. And people are crying, oh, you guys are bad. You guys are being, is it genocide? It's funny how, if you have a certain mindset and you don't think logically, you'll tend to react emotionally.
all right,
And
all right. Can
I
you?
am not your enemy.
No,
Just do some more research. And remember, we're all valid, viable, wonderful individuals.
yeah.
Thank you so very much.
Okay. All right. Okay, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I found my notes that I wrote from watching the. It's called "I Wish You Were Never Born," which is really, really kind of a creative title. And so, and curiously, a chance, it sort of comes off of well, what I wrote was the ending made me think of Toni Morrison's Beloved, which was based on a history of an actual escaped slave in the time of the fugitive slave laws, just immediately prior to the Civil War. Um, and these are my conclusions from that. That the system, capital S, cajoles, deceives, and bribes people into procreation despite their own knowledge that the benefits of that new life, if any, will accrue to the state or capitalists or other criminals. So I don't think I followed how the previous speaker was connected to the topic, but maybe I'm doing the work for him here because basically this is in other words, it's a fact that we shouldn't want to be barred. Instead of making an opinion the way that we've been discussing it, it's like on any reasonable thing, it's like why would anybody want to be born into this? And it's not a philosophical truth. It's basically an economic one. Although economics is about as hazy as philosophy, I guess. But basically, it's like it's in other words, our discomfort at existing is not something existential. I mean, it's like it sucks for the very large majority, not everybody. All right, and I'm coming to that in a moment. Another point. This rather well explains why "Do It for Denmark." I was really taken by that one. Fall on deaf ears. I didn't write down why it was here, but basically it would make sense though because to do it for Denmark, it's like I have reasons to know that this is not going to work. So it's like I don't I'm not gonna let you giving me a couple extra $1,000 isn't gonna change that equation. Here's a more close uh, uh, entailment of that. It also coheres with Elon Musk's supposed consternation at the movement. He has lots of kids because his kids will be guaranteed a materially abundant life. So I think that's sort of what he doesn't say. He doesn't really care if everybody procreates. He wants the rich people to procreate, and in particular, he wants his kids to be around because, of course, he believes in the singularity. But that's a whole other topic. But you know that he's basically looking forward to colonizing the Earth after its economic collapse. And this is the last main point. So the new reading of Beloved, then Toni Morrison's novel. Uh, is that the mother is undermining the slave system the only way she can, asserting on her child's behalf that it would have been better not to have been born. This is not far fetched because if you think of the Indians, the American Indians, the original Native Americans, they were not enslaved because they valued their freedom too much that it wasn't worth it to subjugate them. The Africans that we brought over from Africa, they were previous to becoming slaves to us. They were basically slaves, or at least not wanted in their own polities. You know, their own empires. So they were used to being enslaved. So that's why they were more suitable as slaves. Um, and so the reason Indians were not enslaved is that they valued their freedom, limited as it was once the whites arrived, over their existence. Yeah. So there you go. So that's the basic thing. And then I wrote a little bit about some devices that keep people reproducing Catholicism and inheritance. And well, I don't know. And then I mentioned that the reason that this topic arises now is that the powers that be have in their sights, this would be Elon again, uh, a time when they won't need a slave class because machines can do everything. In other words, this problem's always been there, but we've it's been silenced because well we need people to come to be born all the time. So we're not going to alert people to the fact that their existence is going to be painful and brutish and short and so forth. And then basically we will, but now they think they're not going to need that. They're going to machines. And we're just talking about with respect to, taking care of old people. That we're not going to need that. So now suddenly depopulation is, oh yeah, well we might want it. So let's convince people that it's better not to be.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I want to remark on just to get I wanted to a touch on reality. I mean, apart from what the demographers say, but people's personal experiences here about uh, about the number of people in your cohort versus your parents and grandparents. I mean, let me use myself as an example, and I wonder because I've talked to people, friends, and I see the pattern everywhere. But I'm curious to see what other people, if you want to speak about this, if you don't, um, uh, yeah, I'll let, yeah, if you want us to talk about this, fine. If not, fine. But for example, in my family, my mother came from a family of 7 children. I think only 5 of them survived into adulthood. My mother had 4 children. Of those 4 children, um, one of them had 3 children, one of them had 2, one of them had 1, and one of them had 0. That was me. If you do the average there, we are in just 2 generations, we fell below replacement rate. The replacement rate for each is about 2.1 children per couple. If you want to maintain a steady population, if you drop below that, you're on a path toward depopulation, unless something very radical changes this. But the thing is, what kind of thing could that be that could change this, short of oppressive governments forcing people to have children, or if the idea that technology is going to make it easy for people to have children, or make it take the burden off young people from having to support old people just by replacing care with robots and so forth. I'm not sure that's going to work for most people. Certainly not for me. I'd rather just die younger. Uh, but the point is, I've talked to people I've known well for many years, and I've seen the same pattern with them too, in the past 3 or 4 generations, that they've seen dramatic drops with each generation in the number of children per that they that are being born. Does anyone have an opposite what or even something quite different from that, a different pattern than that in their lives? If you want to talk about it, if not, that's fine. We'll move on.
But what do you think about? I mean, now that I read the notes out loud, it was like I feel like the cohering thing behind it was not very well highlighted, which is that basically that life, and it's sociologically speaking, is basically kind of indentured servitude, right? I mean, it's pretty clear that like during the agricultural eras, which only recently ended, that basically yes, we need a lot of kids so that we can plow the fields, right?
Yeah,
And then if that works out, then we'll be able to sell the stuff in the market, and then we'll
yeah,
need more kids to deal with the bigger farm. So it's a win-win proposition for doing that. But it's always someone else's purpose.
yeah,
It's not, your enjoyment is secondary, if anything.
yeah.
It's like you're born here to serve the people that brought you into existence.
Right. Yeah. Actually, you're right. I think you're right, Jeff. But I don't know that that's the reason why people aren't having children because they think their children are going to be indentured servants. I don't think that may actually be described the reality objectively, but I don't know that it's actually
Well,
a motivation.
but yeah, that's actually kind of where I started out. They're not having kids because the reasons for having kids before, the advantages that you're going to accrue from your indentured servants, as I'm calling them, aren't there. I don't need them for that. And of course, you do have to pay to have them. You have to take care of them. I mean, that's even true of slavery in general, right? It's like you have to take care of even if you have born into slavery kind of thing, then you have to feed those kids for several years before they can do any useful work at all.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's that. But it's so now we're doing it. We don't have a. You basically people don't have kids because they don't want to be distracted from their lives. You saw that a lot in the video, right? It's like, oh, there's too many fun things to do. I'll do it later. I'll do it later. Do it later, and then of course then they can't have any. But then they're like, woof. Well, then we missed all that whole thing. Because what's the point of having kids if I can't profit from them?
Okay, okay.
Does, does,
Well,
uh,
the reason,
does somebody else want to?
yeah, another reason why people used to have kids was because they think about the future, that who's going to take care of them when they get old, right?
Yeah.
And but if you're growing up, in a more modern age, you have your careers, you're occupied with enjoying your life, and kids are a distraction from
Yeah.
that. That's not a reason why they're not having kids.
And also we have institutions like government, Social Security that's supposed to do what in the past kids were supposed to do, take care of their
Exactly right.
elders. And so we have these support system, government support systems.
Government also, assisted living and so forth,
Yeah.
that are very rampant now, that are specialized to take care of the elderly
Right.
when they're not able to take care of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that he points out in the running theme through the documentary is that as the numbers of elderly people balloon, the number of working age people will shrink. Now, and that means a huge tax burden on those people at the working age people, and a great demand as of people. People are also more expensive to take care of as they get older because they have more medical things going on. Um, Now, the one possible solution, as someone pointed out, I forget who it was earlier, that but that this denies the possibility that we will become more younger people will become more was it productive, that we'll be able to get more bang for your buck in the future with young workers than we have in the past, and that will compensate for the lack of fewer of them. Whether that really will be true, I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
Well,
But
there's another reason why. Maybe that's one of the reasons why there are more states passing laws for voluntary euthanasia,
really, I didn't know that.
voluntary suicide. So, like, I thought it was just Oregon before, but now it's California, and a number of other states are passing laws
Yeah,
that allows for voluntary suicide.
yeah. I wasn't aware of that. I was
Yeah.
aware of uh, arguments going back decades from philosophers who suggest that who argued for voluntary euthanasia because they felt that that it's the morally right thing to do if you're at a certain age and you know that your being here is costing the people around you a lot of resources and you're not getting much benefit from it. Your health is pretty bad. Your life is pretty miserable for you. You're alive, but that barely. That you, under those circumstances, if you're still together mentally, the right choice is to voluntarily choose to get out of this. It's not helping you, and it's not helping the people you should care about, the younger people who are still here. He made an argument. There was a philosopher who made an argument that that's what you ought to do. It's the morally right thing to do to dismiss yourself under those circumstances. Um, I'm not sure everybody would agree with that, but there is a case to be made for that.
Can I make a comment, Victor?
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, if I don't have a way to raise my hand because I'm just kind of walking around Fremont there, but there's a couple of things on my mind. The first one is that, yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in AI, and it does seem likely to me that machines will be and should be able to do more and more of the work. And I think that's good. For one thing, we won't have to do so many mundane jobs. And I don't see a problem with that at all. And as a result of that, try to walk around quieter. As a result of that, there will be fewer people, it seems to me. And I don't see anything wrong with that either. So I think, in the big scheme of things, that's the right trajectory to be on. There'll be less global. There's just less people. The second point I wanted to make was that I think it's kind of implicitly assumed that if so, the point came up that if you bring someone into the world, you're guaranteed they're probably going to suffer, and I think it's kind of implicitly assumed that that's unethical. But I'm not sure it is unethical. I think Barbara made a pretty good point that that's part of the learning process. Well, it is, I think. It's also, but I guess I'd like to hear some comments about whether it's really unethical. We're kind of assuming it is unethical to make somebody suffer. I'm not so sure it is. Anyway, those are my comments. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. James, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I think AI is developing to the point where it's meeting the challenge of this population gap, right? Because in Japan and some of the maybe South Korea, the more well-developed countries, they're already using AI to take care of the elderly. So you could have an AI in your house as an elderly person, and the AI the robot can do all the maintenance, housework, and to take care of you. So they already have robots that are doing that, and that might be a way to compensate for that, the population gap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does anybody want to respond to Mike's argument that its suffering may not be as bad as it's some? Take the strict utilitarian ethics says that we have a moral obligation to reduce pain and suffering wherever it's possible. It's not morally right to either create pain and suffering or to create the conditions for it on purpose. And that seems to be one of the things that the antinatalists see is wrong with bringing people in the world. You're purposely exposing people to pain and suffering, for sure, with their own death. In a way, death takes away whatever pleasure and wonderful things happen in your life. Death is going to take them away. Would it have been better had you never had them to lose to begin with? Anyway, that's one of the arguments they use. Okay, I'm going to let Wendell, if you could speak up again, but please try to keep to the topic, and then Sumesh, and then James again. Go ahead, Wendell.
Okay. Like I said, I asked these questions. The pain and suffering, is it from our economic slavery system? Because I have the example of people who are not necessarily currently in the economic slavery system who just go out and pick whatever fruit they need, whatever's in season. It's not like, oh man, I've got to make sure, some entrepreneur, big company, we always have to have strawberries in the store. We always have, it's seasonal. Even, and like I said, I've got to find it to share it again. But back in the day when not too many people could read from the Western world and the colonizers were going around manifesting, taking stuff, they sent out these scribes to say, well, the church got 2 bushels of something, and that, you know, the royalty people, they got 3 bushels, whatever. But in their writings, they said, one of them wrote, these people are so leisurely in their life in the new world, what they call the new world, instead of thinking logically and say, hey, are they living in harmony with nature and utilizing what nature is providing at whatever given time instead of saying it's got to be 4 for $1, 5 for $1?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We're wonderful humans. Once again, I can't say that enough.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Wendell. Okay. Sumesh, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah. So to Mike's question, and also he mentioned what Barbara said earlier. I think it was Barb. Yeah, Barbara. Yeah. So I think what she said was very important. Like this idea that in medieval times, where the average person, you know, endured enormous suffering probably in their daily life. Uh, the symbols, like religious symbols, for example, probably meant a great deal to them, and I think that goes back to the earliest times of history, where religion is one way to, maybe you could say, cope with the suffering, or give meaning to suffering, or contextualize it in some way. And like in Buddhism, I'm not like an expert in Buddhism, but I know in some sense there is a contextualization of suffering as like suffering doesn't actually exist except in your own mind, and you can do things with your understanding of suffering to transform it. And I think that's maybe getting a little bit to what Wendell was saying. I think we're a more secular society now. Even if we are religious, maybe we're not religious in the same way that we're in medieval times or ancient times. So but I think we as human beings have these natural inclinations where we need where something spiritual, something bigger than ourselves, sort of speaks to us and sort of helps us. You could say, take our mind off of the suffering or our impending death and that sort of thing. So, what do we fill that void with now? I think that's what Wendell was saying a little bit was, you know, consumerism. We buy things. We expect. We expect to have this infinite assortment of things we can consume, and we use that as part of our identity, to form our identity, to form our communities. And I think for a lot of people it probably isn't enough. I think there's something missing there from what was natural to us before the introduction of the modern economic system. So I think I would say, so I would agree that maybe there is a moral dilemma here, where if you bring people into the world without an instruction manual, so to speak, like in the past, the instruction manual came from religion, and I'm not putting any I'm not putting that on a pedestal in any way or saying that that's the right way. But I think there is something that needs to fill that void, some form of learning, some form of building people up, building communities, helping each other, giving people that sense of stability, especially in early childhood. If we can't build those kinds of communities, then I would agree that that there's going to be unnecessary suffering. And I think there is kind of a mental health crisis in this in the U.S. and all over the world. I think it's an issue that's not talked about enough. Is like, how do we um, give people that a way of understanding their life, and that is meaningful to them, but also um, minimizes suffering, because I think, some people, it takes their whole life, and then at the end they're like, oh, now I have the wisdom to understand like how to live a good life. But it's like, I wish I had known some things earlier. I wish lessons came to me earlier. And I think when I come across a well-adjusted person, I'm like, wow, this person really has their act together. And if I talk to them, I sort of get to know their background. A lot of times it just comes down to the community they came up in. And so I think that's another angle on it, is the mental health aspect, and the addressing those primal human needs that are not addressed by the capitalist consumerist system we have today.
Okay, thank you, Sumesh. Yeah, I'm going to respond to something to this in a moment, but go ahead, James. I'm going to let you go ahead and talk first.
Yeah, I think that's a good question that the Mike asked about whether suffering, it can be an ethical issue, or that. Yeah, I kind of believe that suffering is linked with learning, and that there are those kinds of sufferings within ourselves, within the person, that can be overcome by learning. And but there are a lot of suffering that's unnecessary that our cultural progress, human progress has helped us to overcome, like diseases and so forth, and you know um, you know science and technologies have helped to overcome the sufferings of the hardships of travel. It doesn't, you don't have to walk across the desert to get somewhere. But at the same time, it can be you know, um, avoidance of suffering can also lead to, a life where you are missing out on what can be learned from life through suffering. Like the novel by what's that guy's name? The Brave New World, right? It's a society where people have overcome suffering by technology and drugs and so forth. So people are living in a kind of a fantasy world where they can avoid all kinds of suffering, but they're living in a fantasy world, and they don't really live life to the fullest. It includes some form of suffering.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, James. Uh, but the point about suffering that Mike and Sumesh and James and I think Barbara at the beginning said, the value of it, that it could be an occasion to to learn, to develop and achieve some kind of wisdom, or something positive can be gotten from suffering. Um, I think that's correct. But the problem here is that that's all well for those of us who are already here. If you're already here, then the best you can do is make the best of your situation. That is, learn from all the bad stuff that happens to you, and hopefully come out ahead in the end. And if you succeed at that, then you can say at the end of it you led a good life, or something like that. But the problem is here is imposing occasions for this learning experience on people who don't who are not here yet. It's the imposition of life and the conditions for suffering on someone who doesn't need the consolation of learning from suffering, because they don't even exist. It's one thing to say that there's a gift in suffering, and there is for those of us who are already here, but it's not clear that that's the case for non-existing people. That I'm going to put you in a situation where you're going to suffer, and you're going to learn from it, and you're going to come out wise and happy at the end of your life. But all this makes perfect sense to living people, but it makes no sense at all to non-existing people. I don't understand how you could say to a non-existing person, it's hard to even conceive of why would a non-existing person want to live in order to have the opportunity to live to triumph over their suffering and gain something positive from it? I can understand if you're already here that this is the best you can, this is what you hope for, and in the best circumstances, this is what happens. But for the non-existing people, I'm not sure that life is a gift. Suffering might be a sort of gift for those of us already here, but for the non-existing, I'm not sure what that. Anyway, go ahead, Wendell, and then James again.
Thanks again. So the little bit of Catholicism that I grew up with, and I hear people speaking about suffering. So is it one of the conditioning still from when it was the church and and the state pillaging as far as the colonization era, from whenever to whenever to now, because there's still France anyway. So that suffering thing, is that like some sort of paying of penance from that religious indoctrination that people still, that got passed on over generations? Because you hear stuff like, yeah, that's how you get growth. You've got, that's a bunch of crap. We don't, it's the system in itself. And all I'm asking is for people to start thinking logically, so we could just say no more empires when this one fails, and say, look, we're going to go back to nature. We're not going to have the fancy Mercedes. We are going to have real systems where we could traverse the planet. And just like how, other animals, they just go, it's no visa, no nothing. It's not like, oh, we are in charge. This is a government. This is a communist government. This is a socialist government. All these scare tactics to keep humans separated, divided, and conquered. We will go back to a no money, all nature system. We could all have what we need, which is food and shelter. I mean, I know. Don't get me wrong. I comprehend about cognitive dissonance.
No, no,
There are people
Wendell, I'm going to ask about. Do you think that
confused.
animals are not don't suffer? I mean, does nature not
Ah,
impose great
I've seen
suffering on
that.
animals?
No, no, I've seen that. Say that again.
You seem to be suggesting something like a go back to nature
No, no, no. The
situation.
last thing about the animal suffering. What was the last question?
The question is, if you think that we should go back to back to nature situations where we live more like animals, that we're not that somehow makes suffering okay, that animals don't suffer. Uh,
Okay.
what do you think of animal suffering?
Alrighty. So what I've seen on the Discovery or Animal Planet, one of those things, where animals are being consumed live by other animals because they don't have a Walmart, a Kroger, whatever, what have you. Basically, what happens is with the shock system, the adrenaline is flowing in these animals. They're in a state of shock, the ones that are being consumed. So there's no, the pain receptors are blocked. So by the time that wears off, on the average, especially in humans, that's about half an hour. So by the time that happens, they've already expired. Parts of them are distributed amongst the pack, or they're consumed, and then other animals come and take care of the rest. So there's no, so to speak, suffering other than the initial trying to escape. Knowing that, recognizing your immortality, as it will. Yeah, basically that's it. But like I said, this is artificial suffering because of our systems. Somebody has to show profit, otherwise they're a failure.
Hmm. Well, okay, all right. I'll skip saying responding to that for the moment, but go ahead, James, and then Mike.
I think suffering does have a kind of a goal. You have think about the great artists and so forth throughout history, right? They've all had to suffer, and so when you're thinking about bringing I don't think about it, but the whole idea of reproduction, of giving birth, is the hope of that that there could be some potential there for development and particularly artistic or scientific development that make that person overcome the suffering that leads to achievement of some great artistic you know creation or scientific invention or philosophical element. So there is a kind of I think there is a kind of a maybe a goal to suffering.
Hmm.
It's suffering doesn't doesn't just lead to nothing, nothing. Maybe most of it does, but maybe 99% of it does. But maybe out of that you know
Hmm.
large numbers, we get something really fantastic,
Hmm.
and so yeah, so I wouldn't be in agreement with suppressing, or suppressing the birthing of new beings because we think that because they're going to suffer, you know.
Okay, thanks. Again, I want to stress these positive things that could be said about suffering only apply to those of us who don't have a choice in the matter. We're here. It's either suffer or make the best of it. It makes sense for us, but what is difficult to grasp is how this is supposed to be uh, a positive thing to place someone deliberately in a position where they will suffer so they can get something good out of it. Uh, I don't know. Would I rather be a wise old man who lived through a lot of wonderful things, but also some very unpleasant things, or would I rather just never have been in the first place? It's not clear to me that the answer is obvious there. Maybe it is for some of you, but go ahead, Mike, and then Sumesh again.
Yeah, I apologize if there's some background noise. Um, Victor, I feel like there's an avenue to attack your, your position. Where basically, if I understand it, it's that since you can't ask someone who's um, not yet born, there's no way to know whether or not they'd be willing to take on this risk of suffering. Well, there will be suffering probably, but I mean, I think for one thing, it's kind of there's one avenue of attack which basically says that you can't ask them. That's true. Just stop right there. If you can't ask somebody, before they're born that question, then it kind of makes claims about what they may or may not think suspect, kind of at the outset. I would assume. And then but I think the question is taken up, and the question is taken up by the parents who make this decision. Yes, okay, there might be some suffering, but we think, and we're deciding that it's worth the trade-off. That it's our decision. So that's the extent of any kind of decision making that goes on, if there is any. So anyway, that's my counter argument.
Yeah, Mike, that's right. I mean, that's typically what happens. Parents make the decision if they make a decision at all, because a very large proportion of people are unplanned births, and it's more like biology and basically determine things, and then people deal with it after the fact. But assuming in the best situation where births are planned, it's a decision by the parents. Uh, to serve their interest, to what they want to have a child. Their they their family urges them to. They've had. Why not? It's a form of going back to immortality, of a kind of immortality for many people who don't believe in dying and going into heaven or anything. They feel the only part of me that will survive me after my death is this child who will carry something of me into the future, and hopefully it'll keep on going. And to the extent that my life has any meaning, it's being carried on by these children. I mean, that's one motive, but that's very much the motive of frankly, the personal, selfish motive of the parents. It's their own interests they're concerned here. And there's a question about whether that's ethical or not. Are we allowed to do anything we want to because that the future generations are going to have to deal with because of our need or desire to do this thing? Um, uh, anyway, that's just the thought. Sumesh, James, and
Well,
Alexander.
can I respond to that really quick?
Yeah.
But Victor, don't you think they're also making this risk and reward calculation at the same time. They're the only ones that can do it. Like, I mean, if you go to some war-torn countries, they may think that the burden of suffering is too great, so don't have children. But I mean, maybe more well-to-do people are making that. They're making that judgment about risk and rewards. They're the only ones that can do it because you can't ask the person being born in advance. So I think it's not. I'm not sure that the motives are just limited to what, as you described, uh, kind of having the parents live in immortality.
Okay. All right. Yeah, go ahead. Sumesh, James, and then Alexander, who hasn't spoken again. Go ahead, Sumesh.
Okay. Yeah. So something James said earlier reminded me of something, and I'm not saying this is what James was saying, but it just reminded me like of I think the maybe you could say part of the crux of this that I'm not sure has been fully brought up is whether it is kind of how much importance you give to like the humanist view and sort of individual agency, I guess, um, and it makes me think of like when we as human beings, uh, since we have this agency that other animals don't have, um, we can ask these questions about um, shaping the size of the population and things like that that other animals can't. So if you think of like for example like an ant colony, an individual ant is really only serving the needs of the larger colony. Um, so in a way, I think there's like an evolutionary argument here of like this is what James said that reminded me of this is the idea that some individual suffering seems to produce these sort of genius types that live these tormented lives, and they sort of push our thinking and our forward in different areas, and this almost seems like maybe it's something that was um, it's like that idea of progress seems to be kind of in our DNA in some sense, and part of and so um, like in the same way that we as humans would want to conserve an endangered species, like we don't want to cut down the redwood trees because then they won't exist for the future generation. Like I guess there could be an argument to be made that like allowing humans to progress along their evolutionary path and not interfering with that, um, like the fact that we exist at all, that the human intelligence exists in the universe, like that's something worth preserving. And the way it's and we don't know, we don't know if humans will live for another 1,000 years, another million years. I mean, million years, I don't know, but or what form we will take. But like, if we interrupt that, I mean, I don't know. Well, also, maybe the idea of downsizing is also part of our, like that. Maybe that's also part of something, because like we haven't dealt with this kind of environment where we have abundance, but also overpopulation, and I don't know. It's an interesting question, but I think like the idea of like individual agency versus what's best for humanity as a species is a different question that I think is I don't know. I don't even know how to answer it, but I was just sort of posing that dichotomy there.
Okay. Thank you, Sumesh. James?
Yeah, I was interested in this question about the whole idea of the population gap. Before I came upon this issue, I thought we were still in a kind of age where there's the problem was the overpopulation, and all of a sudden we have a population gap. So maybe it's a population gap is actually good, and because maybe it's in a way another way to deal with the climate change problem. because overpopulation does exacerbate the climate change problem.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another way of dealing with climate change.
Yeah, there's an argument to be made that depopulation will relieve the climate change things because there'll just be fewer people around bothered by the climate change. If they aren't here, you're not going to be bothered by it. Plus, that supposedly fewer people will put less of a strain on the environment. However, that's going to happen way beyond supposedly the worst of climate change is going to be hitting us before the end of the century. The worst of the depopulation trend, if it continues, according to one of the demographers I read, is going to be shortly after the end of the next century. So first, they're not going to. There may be some relief by depopulation against the problems of at least the people around experiencing the climate change problems. There will be fewer of them. Not that the climate change is going to be any different, just there will be fewer people around to worry about it. That's one idea, but yeah. Anyway, Alexander, you haven't spoken, so go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I'm new to this group, but I've been listening for the last hour and a half, and I do have a couple of thoughts. One, when we said that it's parents who get to make the decision about whether or not to have kids, and like, what are we going to do if parents make that decision, they make that choice, and then the kids end up suffering? It seems like if parents get to make that choice, they should be responsible for the consequences of their actions. So the other thing, as far as what Wendell Jackson said about in nature, you get to just exist until you get chomped down by a predator, and at which point there's enough adrenaline to mask that. What about everyone who just sort of gradually starves to death? I mean, there are species that are being controlled not necessarily through what's the not necessarily through predators. That's the word I was looking for, but just through a lack of resources. And I feel that if we as humans, that's something that Wendell Jackson and I agree on. If we get to foresee how our actions are likely to, the consequences of our actions again, and if we see that our kids are not going to have the resources, if they are more likely to suffer, doesn't that make sense to then not have kids? Just because it happens in nature doesn't mean that we necessarily need to follow that pattern. We're doing a lot of things wrong, but choosing not to bring someone in to consume resources and not necessarily get more out of it than they put in seems like a rational thing to do. And lastly, as far as the tortured geniuses go, how many people are there who are not geniuses and just tortured? And
yeah,
do we really deserve the genius? If we divide out the genius by the number of people who are just tortured, does that really pan out? It seems like forcing a whole bunch of people to be tortured just because one of them might be a tortured genius seems ridiculously cruel. That's all I got so far, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Alexander. I agree with some of those points, but I want to say something about this later. But I'm going to want more people to talk. Make sure everybody gets a chance. Bart, and I'm going to let you talk because you haven't talked before. Then I'll let Wendell talk again. Go ahead, Bart.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion, guys and girls. Really interesting. You guys are really going deep with it. I think the idea that life is tough, so you shouldn't have kids. I think that's something that living in a society of luxury can give you that that room to even consider it. I mean, life is such a gift, And I think, go forth and be plentiful. I'm 45, don't have kids, and I regret wasting my youth and not having kids earlier. I don't know how much I believe people who say they don't want kids. I guess I believe them. It's just there's there's an I think there's an emptiness in life if you don't have kids. And I'm not super like I'm an atheist. I'm not a religious guy, but there's some timeless wisdom in just have a family. Like you want to be happy, have a family, and roll with the punches. Life's tough. Teach your kids to be tough. Prepare the child for the road. Um, yeah, I think that's the long and the short of it. But you guys have said a lot of really thought-provoking things. But yeah, it was the whole suffering thing. Is it like unethical to bring someone into this world because life is tough and they're gonna have a tough life? Ah, ah, I don't buy that. Okay,
Okay, thanks, Bart.
thanks.
I'm going to let Wendell and then Fern. Go ahead, Wendell.
Thank you. So I was wondering also that passing the genes on, is that an offshoot once again of religion or Catholicism about Jesus's bloodline, and if he was, I guess, half human or whatever, and he bled on the cross, there should be some DNA evidence. But anyway, so and to address Alexander, I was watching the Animal Planet or the Discovery Channel or one of those, and there were a series of deaths of a particular animal, and then when the scientists, they did the autopsies, they found that a particular plant that they eat, they overindulged in, and it was toxic in high levels in their system. So, yeah, but when you have artificial suffering caused by the monetary system, which no other living creature has on the planet, then the question is, why do we even need a monetary system? Is it that we are so conditioned to believe, to be in the cult of capitalism, that we can't recognize that, no, we don't need it? And lastly, to quote George Carlin poorly, what if the earth needed plastic and made humans to create plastic, and it's got enough plastic, so now it's getting rid of the humans or something like that? Boom, boom. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Wendell. Um, Fern and then Bart. Go ahead, Fern.
Yeah, sorry for joining late, but yeah, this idea that if somebody has not had a child until they're in the 40s or whenever leads to an emptiness, I'm sorry, that is very unique. Quite a few people choose not to have children and, wouldn't give it a second thought. So, and the other thing is, I think in in advanced industrialized societies, a lot of people, gigantic numbers of people, for example, in a place I was last week, Austin, Texas, have adapted to life without children and they get pets. And there are all kinds of absolutely wacky pet related businesses that I saw. So that's what reminded me of. And those people are making good money. Which reminds me of a great documentary made 5 decades ago called Gates of Heaven by Errol Morris. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of women in particular, girls, are definitely brainwashed at a young age that, yeah, they need to have a child. And, without that, their lives will be empty. But yeah, quite a few women have managed to work their way out of that, deprogram themselves from that. And men were already slightly immune to that. But hey, to each their own. Thanks.
Thanks, Fern. Um, yeah. Well, it's a good place to pause here. I want to thank everybody for their input and everything. Um, I do want to make, since we have a few minutes left, I want to make a comment that it's more of a philosophical comment and see how people react to this. The Okay. I think no one denies, even philosophers, antinatalist philosophers like David Benatar, when he wrote his book. In fact, I was a little amused when he wrote his book. This is about 15 years ago. I forget how many years, but it's been out a long time, and it stirred up a lot of controversy. It's still very much uh, the Bible of the current antinatalist movement. The book again is Better Never to Have Been. Uh, in that book, he says, and I think I could only nod my head at the time. He said, I can offer all the rational, purely highly defensible arguments you want for why we should not have children, why it is not moral to have children. Um, but he also said, I know I'm uh, basically shouting it at a non-audience because he said very clearly that he doesn't think biology has anything to do with philosophy. People are going to continue to procreate, and they're not going to stop just because some philosopher or some academic somewhere says, oh, there are moral arguments against doing so. That people have been making babies forever, and they're going to continue to do so. There's no threat to the human population coming from philosophers anyway. And he was willing to admit that, and I think I agreed with him at the time. What's interesting though is in the past few years, reasons that are the vast majority of the depopulation, the reasons why people are not having children that were brought up in that documentary by Stephen Shaw, had nothing to do with a philosophy. They had to do with more concrete issues like, well, I have I've been brought up in such a way to believe that my autonomy is important, that I need to be deliberate and mindful about the decisions I make in my life. I need to have the conditions have to be right in terms of finances before I can take the responsibility of bringing people into the world. And then when I do, there are very high standards today on what kind of life I'm supposed to be giving my children, and that were not there generations ago. So there's a lot that's imposing upon young people, and for very good reasons, they're being a little less, you could even say, careful about the decision to have children. So careful that they're forgetting to have them. And that seems to be the basic idea behind what is actually happening. Not what should be happening, but what is actually happening with the depopulation story. But it isn't philosophy. It isn't philosophical arguments that people like David Benatar and others have given over the time for why a rational being should decide not to have children, even if it's against biology and against all of evolutionary history. So there's no, I don't think any philosopher is. But what's curious is that as I think James pointed out, and many people pointed out, back in the 70s, no one was complaining about there being the thought that there would be too few people in the world was very far away from anybody's mind. It was the opposite that was a worry. Too many people, not enough resources. This is going to lead to some horrible future event. By the year 2000, 25 years ago, we're still here. The world population is still growing. It is slowing down for sure, but it is still growing. And we're still having wars, but the wars aren't about not having enough to eat. They're about other more luxurious desires that people have, like settling disputes, historical disputes about how people got to their territory, etc., etc., etc. But it's not about because people don't have enough to eat. So okay, but back to my point I wanted to make, and that's this. Uh, we could. One of the things that motivates, I think, philosophers in particular, those who argue for some form of antinatalism, is a sense of of moral development, of species moral development, of rational, and to the extent you believe there's something special about human beings, that they're rational, they're in control of what they do in a way that animals aren't, who are living by instinct alone. Um, that some philosophers have celebrated that we're the only rational being in the universe, as far as we know now. Maybe AI will supplant us, or beings from another planet will show us we're not alone. But at the moment, we are alone. We're the only rational entities, beings who are capable of being rational. Not that we are rational. Most of the time, we're not, in fact. But at least sometimes, on some occasions, we actually think through the things we do with a long-term idea. Is this the right thing to do? Taking into account all the possible consequences we can imagine. This is the view of humanity that major philosophers have defended, that we are special beings because we can do that even if we don't actually do it very often. And that we ought to be thinking about the long-term consequences. Where are we going? What's the point of our being here in the first place? Animals don't have this problem. They just are, and they do what nature has set up for them, what evolutionary biology has made. It set their agenda. We, in contrast, the theory goes, can set our own agenda. We don't have to go by what nature has been doing all this time. So then, given that we have the freedom, at least it seems like we do, to make those decisions, what ought those decisions to be? Should we continue to exist or not? Should we, if we're going to continue to exist, should it be this way or that way? Other creatures on the planet don't have that luxury. Supposedly we do. So then what should be guiding our decisions about the future? And one of the views of human progress is that it's, assuming you believe there has been such a thing, is that we have become over time and more sensitive to moral issues, to doing the right thing than we may have been in the Middle Ages or some ancient time when there were people just did what they could do in terms of taking advantage of the environment and taking advantage of each other, but we're somehow we're becoming more civilized. We're becoming more concerned about the well-being of other people. Is that really true? Certain thinkers like Stephen Pinker, for example, thinks it is true. He thinks that the human world is becoming a better place, according to Stephen Pinker, over time, over history. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it is a view. It's an optimistic view of human nature out there. But one of the reasons why, if that's true, if it's true that human beings are becoming better beings with each generation in some small way, and that we're better people than we were 1,000 or 10,000 years ago, if that's really true, one of the reasons why is because of the expansion of our ability to empathize, to be more sensitive to the suffering wherever it exists, whether it's with animals, whether it's with other races, with the expansion of women's rights, for example, animal rights, the rights of all people to control their own destiny. All these are about expansion of our sensitivity to the suffering of others. If that's the measure of progress, if that's really happening, I'm not sure that it is, but a lot of people think it's a better world. We're better off today than we were centuries ago. If so, then that is a point of celebration, that we ought, not only are we, but we should be trying to expand our moral sensitivity, our concern for other pain and suffering, which leads to an interesting conclusion, that we may become so sensitive to the pain and suffering of not just the living, existing things here on the planet that experience pain and suffering, but the things we know are going to exist, and maybe to the extent we're in control of our situation, we start to decide that, hey, it's better. It's a sign of our development that we literally make ourselves extinct, that we literally become so sensitive that we're not just worried about our decision whether we're going to have children. We start to think about the foreseeable well-being of those future children, and start deciding that since I can't guarantee that their life is going to be worthwhile, we would hope that it would be if they're born, but we cannot guarantee it. What we can guarantee is that they're going to die. Although there's a few philosophers who would disagree with that, who say that transhumanists The one day we will conquer death and suffering. So death and suffering will be optional things. We're a long way from that, but that's a logical possibility. But assuming you're not a transhumanist, um, that you still believe that, yeah, we're mortal, we're going to die, then you can guarantee that the children you bring into the world are going to die. And moreover, even if they are led a very fortunate life, that all these wonderful things they experience that they could not have experienced if they'd never been born, they're going to lose. You're going to lose it at the end of the game. Is it better never to have had it in the to begin with and then lose it? Maybe it is. There's an old story or love song about it's better to have loved and lost and never than never to have loved at all. I'm not sure if that's correct, but it's it seems to be a similar thing. Could be, some people would say something similar with life, that it's better to have lived and then died than never to have lived at all. I'm not clear that's true, but I just want to put that out there. Gang Tan, you haven't spoken yet. Go ahead, and then I'll let Fern and then Wendell.
Yeah, I think life is a luxury. Even though we suffer, we die, but at least we have the experience. If we are still exist and talking here, that means we think it's worth to live. Otherwise, even your parents gave you the birthright, you could kill yourself already. And when we enjoy the life, we decide, other people or our kids, they shouldn't, because it's not worth living. I don't think it makes sense. But anyway, people have different opinion. But I do think the current life we're living in, we spend way too much time just maintain a basic living. Just like I was watching this news because of the Iran war, trying to understand why, what's happened, the history. Just like trying to understand the world. They have to cook, they have to eat, like all this take too much time. It's just like we have no time to even to study, to think, to understand the world. It just like require too much. At the same time, to keep our hearts healthy, the food, the medical system, it just like maintain a basic healthy psychologically, physically, and be able to independent thinking is almost impossible in current world. And that's maybe the reason why the intellect people don't have kids, which is super sad. Then the people don't think they have tons of kids and they don't educate their kids well. So I think that's maybe, I don't know or not, maybe that's how they design human. Sometimes I may even believe human is kind of experiment of the animal and maybe outer space. People, they have this mix, they create this human as experiment. And they don't want us to be enlightened. They want us bound into this. So all intelligent people, they don't have kids, which I think is sad. Maybe another way, because when I have kids, because I believe, I have to pass on my genes. But I do find it's a lot of challenge just to provide the basic living for the kids. So I think maybe another solution I'm thinking, because raising kids take a lot of like nurture, basic needs, let people have kids doing all those. Maybe the intellect can be their godfather, godmother, and share their intelligence. That's maybe a solution for this dilemma, because we both have basic physical need. We all have spiritual need, mental needs, and it seems very hard to fulfill all the needs as current stage of society. So maybe I see that could be a solution. Anyway, I like the topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gentown. Thank you. Um, yeah, Fern and then Wendell again. Go ahead, Fern.
Yeah, this idea that people are still having children, and philosophers, the world doesn't have much to worry from philosophers. That is generally speaking true, but there are a few countries, maybe as few as 5, whose populations are just, in a very bad spiral. And I come from one of those countries. Believe me, I can tell you it's not a good situation to be in. You can look up, what the population of the world is supposed to be by country. in the year 2100, assuming the current, geopolitical configuration remains the same. And you might be shocked at which countries are like, yeah, just going to be far, far like a greater population that of China, just one country whose name, yeah, most people won't even think of right now. So, yeah, this is one thing to consider. Another is that I once went to a talk by, I forget, maybe it was an anthropologist, and he said, like, really, the planet Earth can basically, going by what the other species of animals live, 4 million humans is what the planet can support without any stress being put on it. So extinction, maybe, I don't know, might not be a good goal to aim at, but yeah, if our footprint of the planet can be reduced to that of 4 million people, that might not be a bad state to be in, or a good goal to aim at. And yeah, there's also a letter from Albert Einstein to his very good friend Michel Besso, pretty much along the lines of better to have loved and lost. So yeah, that might be something people might find of interest. Thanks.
Thanks, Vern. Okay, Wendell, and then I want to let Mike, if he's still here, because I don't know if you've been able to raise your hand, but go ahead, Wendell, and then I'll let Mike talk if he wants to.
Thank you. So I heard somebody mention about the number of offspring that Musk has, and I bookmarked it. I've got to go look back. They said the Telegram billionaire, founder or originator of the social media app Telegram, that he fathered over 100 children. I've got to look into that still. But so with that, and I'm wondering, are these people part of the seven mountain dominion people who once again have not recognized that we are all one race, the human race, and are still on that eugenics path that white people are the superior race and their God declared that it's a bunch of crap. We're not bad people if only, I mean, the science is out there, but there's that fear because ever since the 90s, I saw a video and it was about the Muslim population browning Europe. So it's transferred over because it's global, it's a global empire. And these people have fears that their resources are going to be taken away. Why do I have to make more babies to work in your factories? Those are your factories. You make the babies. Have your progeny running the machines. Pay them little to nothing. Keep your economy going. Why do we need this economy? Are we that stuck on this? Can't we think logically and be rational and be like, where was the first title deed registered? When you look at how is it the however many, like is it Italy, I think Britain, whatever, they divided up Africa. And another thing, it's like once more and more people start thinking logically and start saying the same thing, it's going to be like that quote from Mahatma Gandhi, where he said, so few British cannot control 150, I think it was at that time, or whatever the number was, Indians, when they had the salt strike. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, you could get to future state once you extrapolate. You're like, what? Even in some of the writings of, they said Christopher Columbus, they said people would give you stuff because if they see you're in need, they, as a human beings, civilized human beings, that got renamed savages. So funny. It's like that every what you call it is a confession. Anytime they come, these people are crazy, but those are the psychopaths who seem to be in control of the world right now because of the economics. So
Okay.
once more people say, "Hey, no more," the whole thing collapses, and it's no more empires going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Wendell. Okay, I think we're going to stop here unless anybody has any final comments they want to make. And I do want to thank everybody who came for coming and contributing. And even if you didn't, I think it's important. I like to listen to other people as well. So, James, you have a final comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, my final comment is that I'm kind of on the fence about natalism or antinatalism because I see that kids can provide a sense of happiness, for the adults who give birth to them. At the same time, the other argument against that is can be believable, but yeah, personally, I'm married, but I don't have kids. But that doesn't mean that I'm any the less or more happier because I have other things that to do that enriches my life without kids. But there are people who don't have that kind of interest and determination to find enrichment, without the kids. So yeah, so I see the validity of the arguments from both sides.
All right. Thanks, James. And again, thanks to everybody here who's here. I think
Good discussion. I got a lot out of this just by walking around. I think I was listening, but I got exercise too.
all right.
So this is a Fremont Fair.
Okay. Okay. All right. Again, thanks everyone, and hopefully you'll come back again. So take care. Bye.
Thanks, Victor.
Again.
Thank you. Thank you. You guys are wonderful.
All right. Take care. Bye.